Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie for Reason TV. Today we're talking with Michela Wrong, author of It's Our Turn to Eat, the story of a Kenyan whistleblower. Who is the Kenyan whistleblower and what is his story?
The Kenyan whistleblower is John Githongo, who was an old friend of mine. When in 2003 a new president came into Kenya swearing that he was going to clean out the corruption of the Moi era, he appointed this man as his anti-corruption chief. And what happened was that John discovered a whole new scandal called Anglo-leasing, and also discovered that all his closest colleagues, all his ministers in government that he worked most closely with, were involved in that. So then he faced this predicament: do I tell all, or do I keep it to myself? And so that's what the book's about.
And what did he decide to do, and how did it play out?
He eventually decided to go public, and he was in an extraordinary position because he had taken this precaution of taping his conversation over the years with these ministerial colleagues who were saying to him openly, this scandal is us. It's your own ethnic group behind this. So he had all this material, which I think is unprecedented in Africa, probably in most countries. So he compiled a dossier, eventually leaked it to the press. And that's essentially the story, and seeing the fallout, because on the one hand there were a few people who stepped aside, who were asked to leave office, but essentially nobody ended up returning the money, nobody was prosecuted. And one of the themes I try and pull out in my book is that I think the donor community in Kenya, and often in Africa, has proved to be very, very lax and very complacent about these kind of corruption scandals that go to the heart of misgovernance in Africa.
So in the wake of everybody acknowledging that corruption is rampant, that it had survived the Moi regime, there was really no change then?
There was lip service paid, and in fact I believe that the businessmen who went to the new ministers and said, here's a great way of making money, here are all these dodgy security and military contracts, were almost certainly people who had dealt with the previous regime. So there was a very smooth continuance. And I think what happened was that a rather naive and wishful thinking donor community, which desperately wanted to start lending money, which it had frozen off under Moi, it wanted to keep, to start up the money again to the Kibaki regime. They really didn't want to see the evidence of their own eyes.
What is the larger significance of this Kenyan story? I mean, everybody recognizes that if you have a corrupt government or a corrupt regime, you really can't do economic development. You can't really have political freedom or political stability. How does the Kenyan story translate to a larger story about Africa or about the developing world generally?
Well, I would disagree with you. I don't think everyone does recognize the things you said. They should, but they don't. And I think what we've seen in the last few years in Africa is the sort of Jeffrey Sachs school of thought, which is about putting the emphasis on more and more aid to get countries out of the poverty trap, and sort of downplaying the politics and behaving as though local politics, which are very poisonous in places like Kenya and very ethnic, are irrelevant, and you can help a country despite those politics. And I think what the Kenyan case showed, and it's true of many African countries, is you cannot pretend to help a country if you don't cast a very critical eye on the politics of the day. And if you have a government that's busy stealing, there is no point continuing to spout the sermon about helping and aid and rolling out the World Bank projects and the IMF transfers.
So, I mean, you're squarely against the kind of post-war development model, which is that you have organizations like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, which just says, here is a huge amount of money, we're helping you. We call this development, and here's a bunch of money that then governments, states, officials at every level just spend whatever way they want.
I'm not of the Dambiso Moyo school of thought, the author of Dead Aid, who sort of says it's all rubbish, cut it off, 5 years, and that should be the end of it. But I do think that we massively overemphasize and overplay the role that aid is going to play in these African countries' future. It isn't as important as we like to think. It can do more harm than good. It certainly did, I think, in Kenya. It can undermine people like John Githongo.
So what's the best thing that the West can do to help Africa become a richer, freer place?
I think at the end of the day, it's not going to be in Western hands, and that's something that we need to recognise, and something we haven't wanted to recognise with all this emphasis on upping aid. We can save lives in terms of malarial bed nets, treatment for HIV. We can prevent people from starving. We cannot make an African administration do the right thing. And most of the key developments in Africa, the most encouraging ones, have come from the private sector in Africa.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think there's several examples are routinely quoted. The spread of the internet across Africa, the role of the mobile phone in terms of linking people up, making them more aware, the spread of the private radio station, spreading the word about governance, democracy, anti-corruption. These are the really important factors. And actually, these are things that have happened without that much donor involvement.
Explain the title of your book, It's Our Turn to Eat. What does that mean?
It's a phrase you hear a lot in Kenya. You also hear it a lot around Africa. And it's basically about one ethnic community, usually a minority ethnic community, saying if we have our guy in State House in the presidency, it'll be our community's turn to eat. So he'll take care of us. He'll make sure that contracts go to our group. He'll make sure our constituency gets the development money. He'll make sure that it's jobs for the boys.
Your two previous books were In the Footsteps of Mr. Kurtz, Living on the Brink of Disaster in the Congo, and I Didn't Do It For You, How the World Betrayed a Small African Nation, and you're talking about Eritrea there. Why are you interested in Africa?
I started working there as a Reuters correspondent. And it just slowly, I became a de facto expert. And it really has been a professional interest. It's not an emotional interest.
So you're not going to buy a coffee plantation and become the next Isaac Denison?
I don't have family links. And I also, I sort of slightly dislike the sentimentalism. You meet people and they say, oh, Africa gets into your blood. And you kind of think, I find it a fascinating continent. I've got to know very many different countries which are, each one radically different from each other. It's intellectually intriguing. It's incredibly rich and diverse. But I do slightly rebel against that idea that you fall in love with a place. And then in some way that kind of blinds you to it. It's just the place that I happen to have worked.
What, in the post-colonial era, Asia for the most part, South America in large parts, let's even say Australia and New Zealand have come a long way. They're almost civilized now. But Africa continues to lag behind in terms of overall gross domestic product, things like that. Is it, are indicators life expectancy is going down in many African countries. Is there any hope for Africa?
You have to look at the history. The Cold War only ended in '89. So when we tend to lecture African countries about, why is it taking so long, you sort of think the era in which the West and the Soviet Union and China were interfering in incredibly damaging ways and manipulating the local political systems and leaders and with utter cynicism is only over since '89. That is so recent. And then you have to think before then you have the colonial period, the nation state being very fresh, and before that slavery devastating the continent. So I think these are a unique combination of factors. And what you're seeing now is this new generation coming up who are highly educated, very urban. They are the John Githongo generation. They're people who look at their continent in a different way, who are at ease in this cosmopolitan world we all live in. And I think they are going to change this continent.
What is your next project?
I'm actually thinking of writing a novel. When John turned up on my flat and went into hiding at my place at the start of this whole story, I was actually writing a novel, and I would like to go back and finish it.
What's the novel about?
I can't tell you that.
Okay. I just hope it's not about how Africa, like herpes, is in your blood.
No, it won't.
Okay.
It won't.
So, all right. Well, very good. Thank you, Michela Wrong, for talking to us today. Author, most recently, of It's Our Turn to Eat, the story of a Kenyan whistleblower.
Thank you very much.